Hello, this is Dr. Adam J. Bach. In this short audio presentation, we're going to be talking about marketing in the context of technology entrepreneurship. After you've reviewed this short presentation, please complete the graded survey in Canvas. Note, as with most of my sessions, we would normally be doing all of these activities in the classroom, but because this is being delivered virtually, you should go ahead and watch this entire audio presentation and then go to Canvas to complete the graded survey. You're welcome to do this in parts. You can obviously pause the presentation, go to Canvas, and work on the relevant section in the graded survey, whichever is more convenient. There's no time limit on the graded survey other than it has to be submitted on time, so whichever works for you is better. One piece of fair warning. I do not actually have direct experience with what we'd consider to be traditional marketing and sales. At every one of the ventures that I've worked at and founded, I have always had an operational finance and strategy role. And most of the companies that I've started or run have been organizations that have had extended R&D phases, like biotechnology companies. So there is no marketing and sales activity. And so I've tried to keep this relatively simple, and I'm counting on you to review the information in the textbook more carefully. Because I specifically feel like in this context I need to be careful about where my expertise really lies. But it is useful to recognize how important the marketing function really is. Wonderful quote from Peter Drucker. Businesses have two basic functions: marketing and innovation. These are the two things that produce results. The innovation is where the value is created, and the marketing is how that value is captured. So it is really useful to have this perspective and to recognize the expertise that's required to make this work. So your textbook identifies a pretty straightforward marketing plan, identifying the key objectives, recognizing the customer segments, creating the product offering description, identifying the market research and strategy requirements, the marketing mix, which can include materials or processes, and then ultimately customer relationship management. So really, the most critical question in all of this usually comes down to the market segment itself. Ultimately, if you have no market segment for your product or service offering, then you probably have no business. The key point about market segmentation that I feel can't be emphasized too much is how we define a market segment. So many aspects of traditional marketing relied on creating segments based on location or socio-demographics or income or organization type if you're selling to businesses, or other customer characteristics and attributes. So you've probably recognized that students are often considered a market segment. And I understand that. It's a group of individuals who have somewhat similar characteristics. They're in college, they're roughly the same age, on the whole, they don't tend to have a lot of extra cash, and so on and so forth. And this is a useful starting point, but when entrepreneurs limit their understanding of market segmentation to that approach, they tend to miss what's really going on. Ultimately, customers belong in the same market segment if, when they are presented with the same value proposition, they make the same purchasing decision. In other words, customer segments should be based on behavior. You can start with the kinds of characteristics and attributes that I just mentioned, but what it really comes down to is how they make decisions. So, for example, in one of my other classes, student teams design and sell a t-shirt. So they create a new design, print up the t-shirts, and sell them. So you might realize pretty quickly that the most obvious customer groups for this kind of project are the students' friends, who are technically college students, relatively poor. They probably live in Madison, and they're probably in the age range of 18 to 23. And parents, who are, generally speaking, employed, mostly middle class, live outside Madison, and are aged 35 to 55. So how is it possible that these two collections of customers fit into the same customer segment, right? Because ultimately what this comes down to is the behavior. And the point is that we're selling the same t-shirt, and these two groups of very different people end up making the same purchasing decision. So what is it about them that really causes them to be in the same market segment? And I'm guessing you figured this out already, but if you haven't, I'll provide you the answer, which is they're in the same customer segment because they like the students on the teams, right? And this drives their behavior. This probably isn't so much about the t-shirt or the pricing or how it's marketed. It probably has to do with the prior relationship with the students themselves. And that then causes them to behave in a specific way because they want the students to succeed and they want to treat them nicely, and they're willing to spend a little more money to make that happen. And this is why it's so important not to get bound up too much in those characteristics so much as recognizing why potential customers may or may not behave in the same way. Ultimately, all marketing is driven by competitive positioning. And so one way of addressing this competitive positioning is to begin to create perceptual maps. And here's a sample perceptual map for perhaps the athletic footwear industry. We can look at products that are cheaper or more expensive, fashionable or more performance-oriented, and then we can place our products into these areas. This helps us recognize which target market segments we might be going after, and it also creates an opportunity to recognize where there are more opportunities if we're going to be launching a new product into this industry. Whether it's innovative or not, or whether it's really kind of the same old thing but with new packaging, this kind of perceptual map can really help as you're thinking about where the opportunity really lies. A second factor is recognizing adoption timing, because that also creates mechanisms for segmenting customers. So this is the technology adoption curve as really popularized by Jeffrey Moore in Crossing the Chasm. It was developed by another individual originally as a way of thinking about how new technologies or products are adopted by the marketplace. The idea that initially there are innovators and enthusiast customers and early adopters who are likely to purchase a product that's new simply because it's either new or they are prepared to take certain kinds of risks in order to be at the leading edge. The chasm then refers to this issue that the way you market to those early purchasers is very different than the way you need to market to the mainstream. And the mainstream is the big market. Your textbook talks about this a little bit more. This is one of the great concepts in technology entrepreneurship. If you've not read Crossing the Chasm, I strongly recommend it. It's a really well thought out book that helps explain a lot of why so many technology ventures don't succeed. The point being that many entrepreneurs begin marketing to the innovators and enthusiasts and early adopters, and they experience some success, and then they think that they can use the same marketing mix to go after the mainstream market. And then that's when they fail, because the mainstream market is not the same behavior as those early adopters. The mainstream market's driven heavily by benefit cost analysis, and the same marketing that worked at the beginning will not generally work for that mainstream. Ultimately, great marketing is a conversation. It's a mechanism for getting information to your customer and also obtaining information from your customer. You're trying to design, build, sell, and service. Your customer wants to search, acquire, use, maintain, and ultimately dispose. And somehow in between all of that, there has to be a conversation to determine that each one of you is going to get what you want out of these transactions and the relationship. And I think if you perceive marketing as a conversation as compared to, for example, an advertising campaign, you will find that it significantly helps your ability to recognize where the opportunities are with customers. So now what I'm going to do is give you a couple of different tools to think about, and at each stage there's then some work for you to do in Canvas as a follow-up. Again, you can do this in real time if you want by pausing this and going and doing the work in Canvas, or you can continue through the rest of this and then cover the work in Canvas in just a little bit. The classic mechanism for thinking about traditional marketing is what's called the 4 Ps, product, price, promotion, and place. And there are different elements associated with each of those. And for decades, this was how marketing was taught and understood. And it's a useful starting place. It's a useful way to think about the key information that you need to provide to your customers and how the product gets to them to see if there's actually a viable way to sell whatever it is that you're trying to sell. So this is a really good framework to be aware of. And what I want you to do then is in Canvas, you'll select an innovation from a prior class session. Fairly recently, you went through a brainstorming process last week. So you should be able to simply select one of those innovations that you came up with and then complete the 4P analysis for that in Canvas. If you did not do that for whatever reason, you're welcome to come up with a new innovation or to address something that you've seen somewhere. It's less important about the details of that specific innovation so much as that you go through the 4P analysis. But there are other ways, and what are considered to be more modern ways of thinking about customer engagement and the marketing process. And one that I actually happen to like is called these 4 I's of customer engagement: involvement, interaction, intimacy, and influence. And this is a classic business thing where all of the elements start with the same letter. That's just very common. But I like this because this really begins to more approach the way that modern consumers think about products and the way modern companies have begun thinking about the relationship with the customers. The involvement addresses all of the possible touch points between the organization, the product or service, and the customer. The interaction addresses the specific activities, the specific mechanisms and metrics for how information is being conveyed in one direction or the other. Intimacy is the development of the sense of affection for that a consumer has for a brand. It can be very tough to measure, but for those of you who, for example, like myself, use a lot of Apple products, we have that sense of affection or intimacy with Apple. Even just the logo in some ways can make you feel good. I've had students comment to me that they bought a Mac laptop simply because it felt good to have a Mac laptop. And Apple in particular has been a master at creating these kinds of products that generate that sense of feeling good. And then finally, influence. Is the person or customer likely to advocate on behalf of the brand? And that could be by liking, that could be by promoting it to friends, or in other ways referencing information about the product or the brand in their day-to-day lives or online or anything like that. So this is a nice alternative framework and very complementary to the 4 Ps. And so I want you to use this as well. In Canvas, having completed your 4P analysis, I want you to do a marketing campaign or a marketing framework around that 4 I's. So what could you do for that innovation or product or service you identified that would address the 4 I's of customer engagement? It's important to recognize that not all products and services are adopted at similar rates. And we want to understand that there are characteristics of innovations that either make them more or less likely to be adopted quickly. Your textbook identifies these 5 factors these 5 characteristics that that are significant factors in how quickly or easily customers can adopt an innovation. The relative advantage, how compatible it is with their existing values or know-how, how complex it is or difficult to use. Is it trialable? Is there a mechanism for customers to get a sense of what it would be like if they really bought it? And how observable are the benefits if they do choose to adopt it? So again, what I want you to do now is at the end obviously, in Canvas, I want you to think about that innovation and address those at least 3 of those characteristics to describe how you could have either adapt the innovation, adjust the innovation, or how you and use those specific characteristics to try to increase the probability or the speed at which that given innovation would be adopted. And you'll need to think a little creatively. You might have to think about the product or service itself. You might have to think about market segments. You might have to think about marketing campaigns. But I want you to put some ideas together. You don't have to bring data from the outside. I'm happy for this to be mostly a brainstorming session. But I do want you to think about this in the context of here you have something that's novel or new, and you want to try to ensure that it has the greatest probability of being adopted relatively quickly. Finally, I'm asking you to take a look at something that's perhaps not a true technology innovation, although we could argue about exactly what is or isn't a technology entrepreneurial situation. There are 3 videos here, and so you can watch these if you go to the actual slide deck. But I've also put these directly in Canvas where you can also access them. This is an example of a company called Squatty Potty, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but we're dealing with 3 videos, the first of which talks about the actual Squatty Potty product, which is basically a small stool that you use when you're on the toilet. The second video is about the making of the ad. So the first video itself is the advertisement that was posted to YouTube, and this advertisement is generally considered to be a very influential advertisement in terms of how marketers and advertisers began to think about using YouTube and video online for advertising. The second one describes the making of the video and the impact that it had on the company. And then the third one is a newer ad for a follow-on product, which was an odor eliminating aerosol. So I want you to watch all 3 of these videos. Each one of them is only about, the middle one's the longest. I think it's 5 minutes. The other 2 are each like a minute or 2 minutes long at most. And then in Canvas, I want you to apply what you've learned, what you gained from either the textbook or from this presentation, to address a really interesting question. The first video, the Squatty Potty video itself, has something like 37 million views on YouTube. But the follow-on advertisement for the aerosol, which uses the same sort of sense of humor, the same characters, I mean, it's incredibly similar in a lot of ways. But for whatever reason, it only has 4 million views on YouTube. Now, I don't actually have statistics on whether that product was as successful or not, but I suspect, just given the difference in views, that it probably was not. And I would like you to then, in Canvas, brainstorm using ideas from the chapter or from this lecture, why that is, what was different such that that ad did not appear to be as successful. It didn't go viral in the same kind of way, and presumably that product may not have been as successful. So this is the background information that I would like you to have about marketing. Your textbook provides you, obviously, with a lot more details that I'd like you to become familiar with. And then I would like you to go into Canvas and begin using this information in the survey that's in what's called a survey. It's really more like a quiz in Canvas, and then complete the other assignments for the module.